This NFL Week 10 Player Props edition of the Propcast on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by Underdog Fantasy. Sign up with promo code MACHINE to get a 50% deposit bonus of up to $1,000. And we're also brought to you by Rhythm. Start crushing college football and the NFL with Rhythm. Get your 7-day free trial today by going to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/rhythm. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/RITHMM.
And taking a shot to ground downfield. He makes the catch, and he gets in for the touchdown. The catch is made by Calvin Ridley. Wilson, what as he throws deep downfield. It's going to be caught by Metcalf.
Welcome, everyone, to the the Propcast part of the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. You can just tell I just finished doing the NBA podcast, so got NBA on my mind. But hey, we're here for the Propcast for NFL Week 10. Get you guys ready with our player props here for the Sunday games. We'll briefly recap what we saw on the Thursday night football game on Thursday night, of course, between the Bengals and the Ravens. Get into our player props, honorable mentions, touchdown scores, and of course, wrap it up with our best bets for NFL Week 10 on Sunday. But joining me here to help me break everything down happening on the turf and the grass, I got my guy here with me. It's ChrisBeCappinn. Chris, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
What's up, I'm excited, man. As I always am. I'm a typically pretty glass half full type guy, but coming off a really good night. I had a very good night last night. And we got to see a really good football game. I actually fell asleep. I had to wake up this morning and figure out what happened. It was a very low scoring game in the beginning, and then we started to see some fireworks. I don't think I've seen 34 points scored in the fourth quarter, in quite some time. Like I would have to go back and figure that out, and I'm pretty sure I could. But yeah, it's turned into, under was the absolute best play. Dang, I feel stupid for taking an under in a Bengals game. So yeah, I'm excited and ready to jump into the weekend. Both literally and from a player prop perspective here with you on the podcast today.
Yeah, it was a thrilling game last night between the Ravens and the Bengals, to say the least. A lot of offense, especially like you mentioned in that second half, in particular in the fourth quarter of things there. The Bengals got out to, they had a 21-7 lead, and then we saw fireworks in that fourth quarter. A lot of big plays on both sides of the football, more so for the Bengals. Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow, 4 touchdown passes, 428 passing yards for Joe Burrow. Jamar Chase finished the game with 11 receptions, 264 yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. Fortunately for myself last night, it wasn't good as far as the player prop front did go. I think the only one that I did hit was Chase Brown under on his rushing yards. He finished the game 13 carries for 42 rushing yards, and that the Baltimore Ravens rush defense continues to dominate. That was a pretty easy winner. Then I had Mike Gesicki. He did have 9 targets last night, but just wasn't able to get over his yardage. It was really the Tanner Hudson show. Again, the tight end position continues to have success against the Baltimore Ravens. Those two guys combined had 72 receiving yards on 10 receptions on 16 targets theirs. But unfortunately for me, it turned out to be the Tanner Hudson game. I think the other one I had was Zay Flowers to go over on his receiving yards. And that one didn't get any close there. In a game, we saw 69 points combined. You would think that and 290 passing yards from Lamar Jackson, that Zay Flowers probably had a good game, but it was really Tylan Wallace who had the bulk of the yardage there. 3 receptions, 115 yards, and a touchdown there for him. But it was a fun game last night. Chris, you had, like you mentioned, a really, really good night last night. So hopefully we can carry that momentum into the Sunday games here for NFL Week 10. Any other takeaways from last night, Chris, between the Bengals and the Ravens? Well, I know you said you had to go back and watch a replay from the game last night, but what were your thoughts on the Bengals going for 2 instead of kicking the game-tying field goal to maybe send it to overtime? There's still time for the Baltimore Ravens there, but What do you think of that decision?
I love the aggressive nature. I'm always of the mindset. I mean, it was a team last week that was in a similar situation, and they kicked the field goal. They kicked the extra point, and I couldn't remember who it was. And I was just thinking, like, go for two. Like, if you're the road team, like, just go ahead and try to crush the opponent's heart, and like just go for the win. Go for the win. So I know, season on the line. I don't like the Monday morning quarterback and say, okay, well, he should have did this, because if it was successful, of course, you get all the praise, and if it's wrong, if it doesn't work, then you get all the criticism as a offensive coordinator and a play caller and even a player. So I love the aggressive nature, especially like if it's the home team, it's different. But if it's the road team, especially a divisional game like this, I like that idea of trying to take the lead. And you asked for my takeaway for the game in general. If it's really something that we talked about the other day, is that, I mean, clearly Baltimore is the better team, but they probably should have lost both games.
Yeah,
and that's just the way
honestly.
football works. It's
Yeah.
the way football works. The Bengals, when they really need to get a stop, it just feels like they can against the good quarterbacks. So we saw how many points were put up last night. They did a good job of containing a Raiders team that, we don't have to say much about them. But as we talked about, as I said this on the Propcast on Thursday, they gave up 37 points to the Eagles. They slowed down the Browns, but who isn't? They slowed down the Giants, but who isn't? When
Yeah.
they played against the Ravens the last time, they gave up 41. Before that, it was the Panthers who scored 24. The Commanders scored 38. The Chiefs scored 26. So it feels like, yeah, I mean, they may not, like it'll be a good game against them in the Chargers next week, and it'll probably be low scoring. The defense probably won't get lit up as much. But when they play against some of these teams with the upper echelon offenses, can they slow those teams down? And it feels like the answer to that is no. You can't give up, what was it? You can't give up 21 points in the fourth quarter.
Yeah.
Like you can give up 28 points in the second half. So, I mean, we can blame, their defense, their offense, but Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow were absolutely excellent. If football was a 2-on-2 drill, where you just had a quarterback and a wide receiver, they may be undefeated.
Yeah, look, I mean, there were some questionable calls that were made last night by Zach Taylor. A couple of 4 downs where they did go for it. It didn't pan out for them, for the Bengals. And I think a lot of the blame has really been going to Zach Taylor for some of the decisions made last night. And I think that for this Bengals team, they've really been underachieving. I think that this was a game that they really needed to have last night, and they weren't able to get it done. And I think that's when we go back at the end of the season and look back at the season, and we say, hey, if the Bengals miss the playoffs, we'll be looking at these 2 games here, saying, hey, that they should have won one of these 2 games, and that could have probably put them into the playoffs there, but it didn't, or possibly won't. But they're still sitting at 4-6. Ravens a big win there to keep pace with the Steelers in that AFC North division. So we'll see what the Bengals are able to do with 7 games remaining for them the rest of the way here for the regular season at least. All right, before we do get into our player props here for the Sunday games, I'm just to remind everybody that college basketball is officially back. And if you aren't already, subscribe to the College Experience for their daily picks podcast, breaking it all down. Make sure you guys tap in, subscribe to the College Experience there for all your college basketball needs. And of course, I want to take a moment and thank all our listeners here on the Propcast. And if you could do us a favor, head over to Spotify, give us a 5-star rating. Only you can prevent corporate gambling from taking over. All right, Chris, let's turn the page here. Let's get into our Week 10 player props here. I'll let you lead it off, my man. Where are you taking us for your quarterback prop for Week 10?
I'll start by saying this. I actually really love the slate this week, and that might be good or bad. No, I'm not sure, but it does make me want to fire off. So I'm trying to contain myself and not go too crazy. But we'll start this week with we're gonna look at a couple different player props. So like I'll say one for honorable mention from the quarterback position, but we'll go Sam Darnold. Very advantageous matchup, of course. He gets a Jacksonville defense. And Jacksonville, so the player prop I'm looking at, is Sam Darnold to go up and over his passing touchdowns. The number comes in 1.5, and it is already a little bit juiced, like minus 130 and north of minus 130 as well. Well, I guess I should say south of minus 130 on a couple books. So I do anticipate this to close, probably, minus 1 -145, -150, maybe even -160. We'll see how it gets. But Jacksonville's allowed the most passing touchdowns this season with 19, and they've given up the second most passing yards behind only the Baltimore Ravens. You look at this pass defense for Jacksonville, they've really struggled mightily. They rank near the bottom of the league in passing yards and passing defense, which I just kind of talked about. They've allowed the most stats per pretty much all like stats in totality to the quarterback position. And I think that Darnold's in a prime position to kind of exploit the matchup, especially a vulnerable matchup through the air. You look at Sam Darnold, his recent form. He's hit the over in all 3 road games, which I really, really love. He threw 2 touchdowns against the Rams 2 weeks ago. He threw 3 against Green Bay. And I know they were coming from behind in that game, but he still did end up with 3. And in week 1, when he started the season off in New York at MetLife Stadium, or I guess I should say New Jersey at MetLife Stadium, he ended up with 2 in that spot as well. He's been solid. He's been in really solid form. 17 touchdowns in 8 games so far this season, 70% completion percentage. And he's averaged 2.12. So he's averaged over this number. And like I talked about it, on the road, he's going up and over as well. He's over 1.5 passing touchdowns in 60% of his last 5 games. So he's 3 for 5 to the over there. And I mean, he has a very good matchup. The Jacksonville defense is allowing 12.5% more production to the quarterback than average, which I kind of talked about earlier. You got Justin Jefferson out there. You got Jordan Addison out there. I think they'll help capitalize on this weak secondary for Jacksonville Jaguars. So, yeah, we'll go Darnold in this very advantageous matchup to throw multiple touchdowns here, up and over 1.5.
Yeah, it's been a theme this season to really bet on quarterbacks against the Jacksonville Jaguars just because how bad their pass defense has been this season. And I mean, I couldn't talk you off of the passing touchdowns, couldn't talk you off of the yardage in this game either for Sam Darnold. The numbers at 245.5 for his passing yards. So I think every single quarterback, except for Deshaun Watson, has gone up and over their passing yards projection against his Jaguars team. So yeah, I think this should be another big week here for Sam Darnold going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars. All right, for my quarterback prop here, I'm gonna go to that early game, the Germany game on week 10 between the Giants and the Panthers, and I'm gonna take I'm gonna put my faith in Daniel Jones here to get up and over his number of 201.5 on his passing yards. And it's another thing that we just talked about with the Jaguars here, Chris, that the Panthers pass defense, has not been very good, to say the least, this season. Every single quarterback since week 3 has thrown for at least 202 or more passing yards against the Panthers. I know the first 2 weeks it was a slow start, at least passing yards wise, for those quarterbacks. Derek Carr, 200 passing yards in that game, but that was, if you remember, that was a game where they were up by like 3-4 touchdowns in that first half, and they really didn't have an incentive to throw in that second half. And then Justin Herbert, week 2, only had 130 passing yards. But since then, Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell combined for 296. Gardner Minshew had 214 in that game. Joe Burrow, 232. Caleb Williams, 304. Kirk Cousins, 225. Marcus Mariota. That was a week that Jaden Daniels had missed, 205. Bo Nix, 284. And then just last week, Derek Carr, who faced him again, being in a division game, 236 passing yards. So I think it's a good opportunity here. The receivers are healthy for the New York Giants. Malik Neighbors, Wan'Dale Robinson, Darius Slayton. So I think it's an opportunity here for him to, it seems like a bit of a conservative number here for Daniel Jones. So I'll go up and over the number here. Daniel Jones, 201.5 right now, currently over on DraftKings here, Chris.
Yeah, this will probably be the week the Giants player props are better on more than any other week throughout the season. And It's not because they play in a primetime slot at 9 o'clock when most people will still be asleep or, trying to get their lives together early in the morning. It's because they're playing against the Carolina Panthers. So I got a player prop that I absolutely love in this spot. I think there's a lot of, teams that lot of players that wear dark blue that are going to be able to find some success, in this game in London against. You mentioned it. Carolina Panthers defense has been absolutely atrocious recently. So, love your look on Daniel Jones. I think you backed him once this year, Munaf. I think you made some money with him backing Daniel Jones in that spot, and I mean viewers should know as well. If Munaf is backing Daniel Jones, is because he absolutely loves the spot. So it's not a Daniel Jones play. It's a play on the opposing team. That's also a combination of that. So I love your look on Daniel Jones here. I think he cruises up and over the number as well.
There is a 198.5 currently over on on FanDuel right now, but consensus right now is at 201.5. So if you get to this early and that number is still there at FanDuel, at least at 198.5, go ahead and take that over if you can. All right, Chris, before we do get over to our next set of player props here, let me tell everyone about our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Underdog Pick'em has one of the biggest menus for all sports: NFL, college football, college basketball, MMA, NBA, NASCAR, and more. Boostober is upon us, which means you're getting a spooky amount of profit boosts and much more. You can now use specials and boosts on all flex entries. Sign up with promo code MACHINE to claim your special pick and first-time deposit offer up to $1,000 in bonus cash. UnderdogFantasy.com. Make sure you use that promo code MACHINE. All right, Chris, let's keep it rolling here, man. Let's get over to our next set of player props here. Where are you taking us for player prop number 2?
We not. It makes no sense to come back over the pond here, So we'll stay in London. We'll go Tyrone Tracy. Same game, I love his rushing yards in this game. The number is set a tad bit high, but I think it's absolutely for a good reason here. Best number I see. Well, I guess not the best number I see. I see 69.5, but most common number that I'm cool with playing as well is 72.5 for his rushing yards. Number available on FanDuel. Only a little bit of juice attached there. You look at you talked about the pass defense being bad. This is also one of the worst run defenses as well. And I know Devin Singletary is back, but you look at the snap share. Tyrone Tracy had a 72% snap share last week, whereas Devin Singletary only had a 28. And then you go back 2 weeks ago, it was 57-39. So I'm not too worried about him having to split the backfield. This is the worst rushing defense in the NFL. The Panthers are allowing a league high 159.3 yards per game, and their defense has been particularly poor against the run defense, ranking second worst as well. So super favorable matchup. He's been a workhorse for the Giants as well. If he's averaging 16 carries in 4 of his last 5 games. Role remains pretty strong. He's played 69% of the offensive snaps in week 9 and had 17 carries last week as well. I think the volume will be there. Tracy's he's only hit this line in 40% of his last 5 games, but I think why that has been inconsistent, I just think that they found it's going to be a lot of mixing and matching. I think through the air to Malik Neighbors and on the ground with Tracy would not surprise me at all if he ended up with close to 100 yards rushing in this game versus a very poor Panthers defense here. So last but not least, I just wanted to point out the other running backs that they face. Last week it was Alvin Kamara, who had 29 rushes for 155 yards. 2 weeks ago, it was a split Broncos backfield. Both Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte Adams ended up with about a little over 4 yards per carry, but both of them finished south of 50 yards. But it's just been really, really poor throughout the season. Brian Robinson Jr., 71 yards a couple of weeks ago. We remember what Bijan did, and Tyler Aguilar, who both ended up with north of 95 yards. So yeah, I mean, I'm always down to play against the Carolina Panthers, and I think we do so through the ground and through the air, like you mentioned. So I did take Tyrone Tracy up and over 72.5 rushing yards here.
And you also take a look at the rush attempts as well, right? What these teams are averaging, close to 29 rush attempts against the Panthers. The only team that ran less than 23 times, which was a low, was the Raiders back in week 13. They only ran the ball 13 times, which equated to 41 rushing yards for the for the Panthers there, or sorry, for the Raiders, I should say. But since then, like you mentioned the numbers there, Chris, it's hard to argue against it. This just overall, this defense has just been really, really bad for the Carolina Panthers there. So hopefully it's a big offensive night, or I should say offensive morning, at least here in the States, waking up and seeing that hopefully these numbers did get up and over for us against the Carolina Panthers. All right, for my next player prop here, I've talked a lot about receiving yards for running backs. I'll say one for honorable mentions. I'm gonna go with a sneaky one here. I've talked a lot about Devon Achane on this podcast about his rushing yards, but I think the market has adjusted to that number now, and that's last I saw was at 45.5 for Devon Achane. So I think I'm kind of priced out there now. So I'm gonna pivot over to Raheem Mostert on his receiving yards. The number's at 7.5 for him, and I think when we talk about Tua being back, that if those big plays down the field are not there for Tua, whether it's a Jalen Waddle or whether it's obviously Tyreek Hill, that he likes to check it down to either Devon Achane or to Jonnu Smith. Raheem Mostert has also been a little bit involved here as well for the passing game, at least with Tua and the Dolphins. So this number's at 7.5. Last week, I believe he had 32 receiving yards. Did Raheem Mostert, or I know he was in double digits for sure. Let me pull up the exact number here for Raheem Mostert. But I mean, Mostert's a guy that I know that can get this done in one catch. And I know that if you're looking at the numbers and the box score for him, that the targets really haven't been there for him. But I think there's an opportunity here in this game. Going up against the Rams, which has another total that's 50 or more points in this game here on Monday Night Football. But Raheem Mostert in the 4 of the 5 games this season, Chris, that he's played in, has had 10 or more receiving yards for this Dolphins team here. So if he gets another couple targets here, I think he could get this done in one catch. So give me Raheem Mostert, a sneaky play here, over 7.5 receiving yards here, Chris.
Yeah, 7.5, such a low number, Munaf. And you mentioned, like, I think the biggest part of the handicap is the very beginning, how much Tua loves to utilize his running backs. Like we've seen it all season, right? Whether it's Mostert or typically it's been Achane, but yeah, he loves the dump offs. He loves to not force passes down the field and utilizes the running backs in the running game. And with such a short number, like you said, one catch is probably all it takes for him to break one tackle or stiff arm one guy or juke one person, and you've cashed. So yeah, I think this is super conservative number here, I think I would be looking towards the over as well. I think that's a good find by you.
Yeah, I think the number has adjusted down to 6.5 now, so we're getting even better numbers. So it's available at Bet365, DraftKings, and BetMGM there. So I'll give it out officially at 6.5, where it is available at multiple books right now for Raheem Mostert. So 6.5 over on his receiving yards in this game. All right, Chris, let's keep it rolling here, man. Let's get over to our next player prop. What do you got?
All right, so we'll go over to the Jets and the Cardinals, and I'm looking at your guy, Mr. Garrett Wilson. Think he's in line to have another big game. I contemplated, whether I wanted longest reception at 22.5 yards, something that he's consistently been able to go over, whether I wanted his over receptions at 5.5, which I think that's something that he's been able to go over with the targets being there. But I think what I landed on, is, and I may split it. Longest reception at over 22.5, and this is over receiving yards in general at 66.5. Both of those numbers available on FanDuel. Just a slight bit of juice attached to both, but he gets a really good matchup here. The Cardinals allow the 7th most receiving yards per game to the wide receiver position, 158.6. And this is a Cardinals team that uses zone coverage at the 11.5 rate so far this season. But they rank 30th in defensive success rate while playing zone. And we've seen them give up really big numbers to wide receivers. And that's also a strength for Garrett Wilson. His numbers typically go up when he's playing against zone. Over the last 5 weeks, we've seen him, really start to gel with Aaron Rodgers. And then you got Devontae Adams coming over, which we thought that would be detrimental. But that's only opened it up even more for him. Last 5 weeks, he leads all wide receivers with an average of 8 catches on 12 targets for 94.6 8.4 receiving yards per game, which is second amongst all wide receivers. So yeah, he's been excelling at zone coverage. He ranks second in targets. He ranks third in catches. He ranks fourth in yards after the catch versus zone since going back to week 5. So I love Garrett Wilson in this spot. Like I said, I'll probably take the over on his longest reception, at 22.5. And I'll probably also get there with his overall receiving yards. I think 66.5 is a tad bit too conservative here for Garrett Wilson. I wanted to make sure I mentioned just his receptions, his longest reception in general. So the number of 2.5 last week against your Houston Texans, he had a 26-yard reception on Monday Night Football. We go back 2 weeks ago against the New England Patriots, he had a 35-yard reception. Pittsburgh, 27-yard reception. Buffalo, 24-yard reception. So it does feel like, that longest reception, whether he gets the yards or not, has been there. But over 22.5 is something that he's hit now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of his last 8 games, going all the way back to week 2. So yeah, I like both of them. Over longest reception at 22.5 and over 66.5, a number that he's gone over in 4 of his last 5 games as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I mentioned it on the Propcast here at another show about Garrett Wilson on his longest reception to go over, but I mean, you laid out the numbers beautifully there. I think that it's the part that it's opened up opportunities for him, being on the other side of Davante Adams, right? And I think that attention that needs to go to Davante Adams, that opens up opportunities here for Garrett Wilson in this offense there. So again, couldn't talk you off of either one of these games or either one of these plays. And right now it just seems like it's a time for the Jets to start piling up these wins and do whatever they can to get back to 500 if they want to make a playoff push or get a playoff spot in that AFC. But again, it's really been a pretty good season thus far, I should say, for Garrett Wilson. He's had 60 receptions, 5 touchdowns, and again, like you mentioned, more importantly, the longest reception has been a very, very profitable angle for him thus far this season. So we'll not talk you off of that one for sure. All right, speaking of another guy that I do like for both longest reception and receiving yards, I'm looking at George Pickens here, Chris, of the Pittsburgh Steelers against the Washington Commanders. Did see a note that Marshawn Lattimore, that the Commanders traded for, is not going to make his season debut just yet. I should say his team debut for the Commanders. He's dealing with that. I believe it's a wrist injury for him. But I think it's more so that that things have opened up for George Pickens with Russell Wilson now under center for this for the Steelers team. So looking over the last 2 weeks here, Chris, George Pickens has had against the Jets 5 receptions, 111 yards and a touchdown on 9 targets. And then last week against the Giants, 5 targets, 4 receptions, 74 receiving yards in that span. And we know that George Pickens is a guy that is a downfield threat. He has that athletic ability. It's just about getting the football to him. And we know Russell Wilson, right? He loves throwing a deep ball. I know they did acquire Mike Williams to also help in the wide receiving room there for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I just think that George Pickens can continue doing what he's been able to do over the first 2 weeks here, as Russell Wilson is the starting quarterback for this team here. And just kind of looking at Pickens' numbers, over the course of the season, as far as when it does come to his longest receptions thus far this season, and I think it would be smart of me to at least give out those numbers for these guys or for his numbers. So longest reception right now, I think the market has adjusted a little bit here, Chris. It is at 25.5 for his longest reception. And then his receiving yards number is sitting at 64.5. I think this number opened about 62.5 or 63.5. So a little bit of money coming in on the over there for George Pickens. But I'll quickly just mention his longest receptions here. So the first 2 weeks as the starting quarterback, the Russell Wilson led Steelers, 44 longest reception against the New York Jets, 43 against the New York Giants just last week. But prior to that, he had 31 against the Raiders, 38 against the Indianapolis Colts, 27 against the Chargers. Then week 1 against the Atlanta Falcons, he had a 40 yard reception. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of the 8 games thus far this season that he's gone up and over this number has George Pickens. So I'll give you 2 here. Longest reception, like you gave out for Garrett Wilson, George Pickens. Over 25.5 longest reception, over on his receiving yards of 64.5 this week against the Commanders here, Chris.
Yeah, this was something I thought about going back to as well. Of course, it's bittersweet because it's against my Commanders this week. But you talked about it. You talked about what he did against the Giants, and that was one of the player props that I had last week, right? It's kind of a system play. I couldn't find the person to fit in that system this week. Because with Breece Hall as the quarterback, that wide receiving core. So I laid off of it. But yeah, it's system play against the New York Giants, and he just has that big playability, and they're really utilizing him as a downfield threat, to kind of take the top off the defense. So no way I could talk you off looking at George Pickens. He continues to surprise me with it every week, but who am I to question, how many targets he's going to get and if he's going to be able to catch the ball down the field? Clearly it's been working for him. I wouldn't jump off the bandwagon now.
All right, before we get into honorable mentions for week 10, let me tell everyone about Rhythms. SGPN's Prop Partner Rhythm is the #1 AI-powered bad sports betting platform that helps provide bettors of all levels the ability to build custom predictive betting models in seconds and get predictions for betting on money lines, spreads, totals, and props. Build your own model, copy one of the top-performing models, or press build a model for me, and Rhythm gives you predictions for every game and player prop, and also has a myriad of stats, research, and trend analysis for even more betting insights. And now you can also track your props over on the Rhythm app. And Rhythm just launched also their college basketball models for the college basketball season. And looking at a player prop that they do like for this week, talking about that Steelers and Commanders game, Rhythm likes Jaden Daniels over 43.5 rushing yards. They're predicting he has 63 in this game against the Pittsburgh Steelers there. So claim your 7-day free trial today by going to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/rhythm. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/RITHMM. And we're also brought to you by BetUS. Bet with the best in the business, BetUS. BetUS has been around for more than 30 years. Easily deposit using cryptocurrency and get lightning fast payouts. US players are always welcome. Go to sportsgamblingpodcast.com/BetUS. That's sportsgamblingpodcast.com/BetUS, promo code SGPN. So they know that we sent you. BetUS, America's favorite sportsbook. All right, Chris, let's get into honorable mentions here for this week. Anything that is on your short list there that you are trying to get to?
Absolutely. For time purposes, we'll just give out 2. I'll give out 2. And the first one is a proud, almost sponsor of the show here, at this point in time. It's Alvin Kamara. Not sure if I want to go over on his receptions or over on his receiving yards, but I think that they're both a little conservative right now. Reception sitting at 4.5, receiving yards sitting at 37.5. You just look at Alvin Kamara and what he's been able to do, especially without them having their top wide receivers down there in St. Louis. And last week against Carolina, now granted it is Carolina, but six receptions for 60 yards on 9 targets. 2 weeks ago against a very stout Chargers defense in Los Angeles, 11 targets, 6 catches for 55 yards. 3 weeks ago, 7 receptions against the Denver Broncos, 7 receptions, 6 catches. Did only have 14 yards in that game, but 8 receptions 2 weeks before that as well, 9 receptions before that. That over 4.5 feels like it's free right now against an Atlanta defense that can be vulnerable to giving it up to running backs specifically. So I debated whether I wanted receptions over or receiving yards over, and receiving yards is something that has also been a nice token recently. He had 60 last week. I mentioned that, 55 the week before. He did go under 2 weeks back to back against Tampa Bay and Denver, but before those 2 unders, if he had reeled off 4 straight overs with 40 plus receiving yards or more. So I say all that to say that he's 4 for his last 6 to the over on his receiving yards, and without those wide receivers, this one kind of feels like it's a necessary play. So like I said, debating those two, receiving yards over or receptions, and then the other one is Patrick Mahomes. I just kind of feel like it's more of a field play. I know that they he's been coming off a strong week where last week I talked about liking his passing touchdowns over. He got there, and I think it could be as simple as this connection with DeAndre Hopkins already.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been really, really good. He had a strong performance last week. I gave out the 1.5. It was like really good plus money. Now it's still plus money, but it's only plus money at one book. It's plus 102. He threw 3 last week. And like I said, just really good connection with DeAndre Hopkins, who had 2. Travis Kelce, who hit the 100-yard mark for the first time all season, starting to kind of get it going as well. And the Broncos, they could be vulnerable to quarterbacks. I know they don't give up the most passing yards, but they can give it up. We saw Lamar Jackson have a really good week last week. So I think he is in a favorable matchup. He's gone up and over 1.5 passing touchdowns in I think 2 of his last 5 games, and they've been back to back. I know it's not an overwhelming, hit rate, but based on his recent performance and DeAndre Hopkins being there, Travis Kelce, I think that we continue to see, Patrick Mahomes trick play to Xavier Worthy. All of those things I think are on the table here. So Patrick Mahomes still listed at plus money to throw 2 passing touchdowns. Also called my eye. Munaf has not pulled the trigger on that one quite yet, but those will be the guys, Kamara and Patrick Mahomes for me. What do you think about those, and what are you thinking about potentially getting to the window with yourself?
Yeah, I'll start with the Hopkins one. I think he either tweeted out or put something on his Instagram of a picture of Randy Moss and Tom Brady together.
I
And I
saw
think
that too. Yeah, he
something
almost
that
got emotional, talking about like being on it. I don't know if you saw the interview,
Yeah,
but
he
he
did.
almost got emotional talking about just the hard work paying off and finally being in a position with a coaching staff and a quarterback and the whole team is like somebody picked him up from Jupiter and brought him to Earth for the first time.
And again, it's been a while for DeAndre Hopkins being in that situation. I think that situation was in Houston when he was with Deshaun Watson in the early part of Watson's career when he was having success here in Houston. But since he got traded to the Cardinals, I know they went through some quarterbacks there as well, especially with that injury that they had to Kyler Murray. And then he went over to Tennessee there with the quarterback carousel that they had going there. Now, being with an organization, obviously Super Bowl champions, having the best quarterback in the league, that's just going to motivate him and just a change of scenery there. So, yeah, and now it seems like the weapons are starting to starting to form around Patrick Mahomes now, right? You mentioned Travis Kelce. He's starting to find his stride here as well. Obviously, D-Hop, Xavier Worthy. I think they're going to get Pacheco back pretty soon here for this team. They also still have Kareem Hunt. So the weapons are there around Patrick Mahomes. So couldn't talk you off for Mahomes. We're now in a world where we're getting 1.5 passing touchdowns at plus odds for Patrick Mahomes there. But that number is probably not going to be there very long if he has another 2-3 touchdowns this week. The other one you mentioned, Alvin Kamara. I think it's almost like an auto play at this point, Chris, if you want to take a rushing yards or rushing and receiving to go over, just because of all the injuries that they have at the skill positions, right? Chris Olave is probably going to miss some time for this team as well. They've already been without Rashid Shaheed. And again, when you talk about Alvin Kamara being with this organization for so long and now will be with the foreseeable future, after signing that contract extension, I think that there's going to be I don't say an emphasis, but obviously he'll be involved in the offense a lot more with Derek Carr there for the New Orleans Saints there. So really couldn't talk you off those two here for the honorable mentions. A couple of guys I was looking at, or I am going to be on here. I did give out on our player prop. George Kittle to go up and over his number for the San Francisco 49ers. The number's at 58.5. He's been really good over the past several weeks there. I know that the Niners were also dealing with injuries, but all indications are that Debo and Jawan Jennings are going to play this week. They're dealing with their own respective injuries. But I think that if they are limited in this game, that I think that and I mentioned this several times, that Brock Purdy and George Kittle, just the chemistry and the rapport that they've built ever since Brock Purdy took over as the starting quarterback for this team has been on full display. Just honestly, just look at the numbers for George Kittle thus far this season, and obviously over the past several weeks here, it's been absolutely phenomenal. Last 3 weeks, 128, 92, 58, and then 64 receiving yards. But it's more so of me talking a lot about how bad the Buccaneers defense has been against the tight end position. I believe they're allowing either the second most or the third most receiving yards to the tight end position there. So I do like the George Kittle in this spot here. Last 2 weeks for the tight end position against the Bucks. Kyle Pitts, 4 receptions, 91 yards, and you mentioned last week what Travis Kelce was able to do, having his first 100-yard season, or sorry, 100-yard game this season for the Chiefs. There was another one I was looking at, and it's kind of slipping my mind right now. God, who was it? The Bears game. Longest receptions for either Cole Kmet or Roma Dunze to go up and over those numbers. If you look at Cole Kmet's numbers, just his longest receptions, he's been going over those numbers rather easily in the offense here with Caleb Williams there. So I do like that. Calvin Austin hasn't dropped just yet for the Steelers. He's also had success alongside George Pickens as Russell Wilson has taken over as a starting quarterback. And then Sunday Night Football, my Texans, we did get the news that Nico Collins will be back this week. His numbers haven't just quite dropped just yet, but I do expect him to pick up right where he left off for this offense of the Houston Texans. And they're going to need them in every which way are the Texans there. So looking at those couple ones up for this week here. Chris, I don't know if you have any thoughts on those. And if you do, we can move along here to touchdown scores after that.
Yeah, no, we can move on. If I'll just say I do like those. I did contemplate, longest reception in that game. Cole Kmet's been absolutely on fire, it feels like recently. I know last week I talked about liking DJ Moore to score a touchdown. He didn't find the end zone in that game. But I think the other one I thought you was going to point out, and I guess I'll save him for touchdown score. But your guy, Kate Otten, I thought that you might not get off that train. Yeah, because he's been absolutely on fire as well. Being a big part of that offense without those, top wide receivers being there. So, yeah, I like yours a lot, though. I think you got some solid honorable mentions for sure.
All right, let's get into touchdown scores for this week here. Chris, what are you looking at?
Man, this list is long, so I'll try to be short. Try to be short with a long list and maybe not go through all of them. But favorite one is probably Jalen Hurts here, plus 110. If I can get Jalen Hurts on a tush push against this poor of a defense in Jacksonville, I absolutely love that this week. He's been a goal line monster. He's had 6 rushing touchdowns in his last 3 games, So if I can get him at plus money, I gotta invest a little bit there. And I'm sorry, it's not Jacksonville. It's Dallas that ranks 5th in defensive success rate. They've been terrible. So divisional matchup, I think Jalen Hurts finds some success there. Especially, in that fight to see who's going to win the NFC East is very, very close at the top. Not as much behind, but very, very close at the top between my Commanders and the Eagles. So I love Jalen Hurts this week. Justin Jefferson, I feel like is pretty chalky, minus 105 for him. He's been heavily targeted, 40 targets over the last 4 games. So he's averaging 10 per game. And of course, he faces the Jacksonville defense that I love Sam Darnold to throw 2 touchdowns again. So if I'm thinking if he's going to throw 2, then Justin Jefferson at minus 105 seems like he's primed to get off the touchdown drought. He had a touchdown in every single game. And then all of a sudden, 2 weeks, he hasn't had one. So probably gets back on track this week, I think. Going back to the early London game, Malik Neighbors, he's also been a big target machine, seeing double-digit target in 5 of his 7 games so far. And you got a Carolina Panthers defense that you talked about it already, dead last in coverage, and they've been absolutely burned by outside receivers. So he's due for a touchdown as well, I think, after I think it's been 4 games since he hasn't scored. And then last but not least, we'll go with your guy, Kate Otten. He's also been a target monster with double-digit targets in the last 3 games in a row. He scored 4 touchdowns over his last 4 games, and I think he'll continue to see really heavy usage without Mike Evans and Chris Godwin over there. Also couldn't really pick between Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams. Garrett Wilson is plus 138 over on Bet365. Devontae Adams is plus 135 on DraftKings. I think they both could find the end zone. Maybe I take them both in,
Yeah.
Maybe I sit it out and don't take either, but maybe I take both, especially at plus money. Just go have unit on both. But yeah, that's my short list. 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it was 6 guys I just talked about there.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with the 2 guys that you just mentioned, Garrett Wilson, Devontae Adams at plus odds. I mean, who else will score for the Jets team here? I mean, I know that Aaron Rodgers is going to be looking for those 2 guys, so getting those at plus odds, I'll take that every day of the week. And now Devontae Adams got his first touchdown with the Jets last week against my Texans there, and that was around, I think we mentioned at plus 165. So I think that, again, that can continue here, at least finding the end zone here between those 2 guys. You mentioned Malik Neighbors there as well. I like him this week to find the end zone for the Giants there. George Kittle around even money. Definitely shop around. You probably get some better plus odds on that. He's been a touchdown machine as well for the San Francisco 49ers. No, we didn't mention Christian McCaffrey making his return for the San Francisco 49ers, but just want to mention the price here is anytime touchdowns at minus 230 here, Chris, for his first game back this season.
What are we doing?
It's absolutely wild. Those are the 2 I'd like. Travis Kelce's at plus 125. I think some of these 2 guys here, Chris, something similar to what we just talked about, the Jets, Kelce and Hopkins, right, for the Chiefs. Plus 125 for Kelce over on DraftKings, plus 155 as well for D-Hop. Those are 2 guys you probably want to get on there as well. And I think that is pretty much it that I was looking at here as far as touchdown scores. I know Nico does return for the Texans this week on Sunday Night Football. He's around plus 135 or plus 155. Let me see. Check the number here.
I feel like he hasn't been out that long, but I know for you it probably feels like forever.
Yeah, it's been a minute. At least for me, it felt like a while here for Nico. He's at plus 135 over on DraftKings right now for him to find the end zone. And I know you mentioned Joe Mixon last week. He's all the way up to minus 170 now to find the end zone for the Texans there. But I think I don't know how many games in a row he's got a touchdown now for the Texans. So
good old Joe. I don't know if I gave out eyes, but Kate Otten is plus 185. FanDuel, best number I saw. Malik Neighbors is plus 135. DraftKings, best number I saw. Justin Jefferson, I don't like we always talk about not playing too much minus money. But he is minus 105. So should be a nice bounce back week for him. And then you can still get Jalen Hurts at plus 110. And you mentioned Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams being north of plus 130. So yeah, definitely shop around, get the best numbers, but I love these sitting at plus money this week.
All right, so there we go. Those are our touchdown scores for this week. Let's get into our best bets to wrap up this NFL Week 10 props episode here. Chris, I'll let you lead off, man. Best bet, where are you taking us?
I think I'm going to go wide receiver this week. If I typically like to go running back. We cashed with running back yesterday. Is Chase Brown under on his rushing attempts. He did stay under for us. Thank you to the Bengals organization for not running the football. So we'll go Garrett Wilson this week. We'll go receiving yards. I think receiving yards get there. 66.5 on Garrett Wilson receiving yards. Like I mentioned, the matchup, the Cardinals, 7th most receiving yards per wide receiver because they play such a zone defense and they have the worst success rate. So I think we see the targets for Garrett Wilson, even with Devontae Adams being there. Those targets are absolutely just through the roof, and it's helped them a lot having Devontae Adams. So he's probably super happy about that. 2nd in targets, 3rd in catches, 4th in yards after the catch versus zone since week 5. So we'll go Garrett Wilson up and over 66.5 receiving yards. Best number, minus 114 over on FanDuel.
All right. For my best bet, I think it's going to be George Pickens this week. I think he just continues to have success here for this Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Like the addition of Russell Wilson there, obviously at the quarterback position. It's again a very small sample, but I think that he has a pretty good matchup here against the Commanders. Number one, coming off of the bye week here for the Steelers, so I think they'll put together a great game plan as well. But I think George Pickens will continue to stay involved in this offense here. So I'll give out the receiving yards over 64.5 for George Pickens this week against the Washington Commanders as my best bet. And that is going to do it here for this edition of the Propcast, NFL Week 10 player props in the books here. Chris, anything else you want to mention before we get out of here?
Just to enjoy the week, man. I think it's some really good matchups, and I think this is the second week in a row. You know, if I don't say this too often, but I love our player props, and I think we're in a really good spot. And I know we did pretty well last week as well. So hopefully we can, like you mentioned, kind of carry that momentum over from last week and Thursday night football and shift it on in the Sunday early morning game between the Giants and the Carolina Panthers, and we'll roll right into to Sunday 1 o'clock games, and hopefully we can get some cash there, and 4 o'clock games and the rest of them as well. So as we always say, we promote uh, you know uh, responsible gambling on this podcast, and we want you guys to responsibly wager your money, so that you can get a return with some of these player props that we're giving out. And best of luck on the player props that you guys like as well. We appreciate everybody for tuning in as always, and enjoy the games.
Yeah, echoing everything Chris just said there. Could not have said it any better. What about what Chris mentioned, of course, here about just betting overall and just being responsible. And I think that if you're able to do that, you'll find success betting, and honestly, just surrounding yourself with the right people when it comes to the betting, because when you're in this for so long, you'll surround yourself with the right people to give you information, things that they're looking at that possibly you haven't caught, and maybe you've found something that they haven't caught. And I think that just helps, us grow as betters. And again, we also have to remember that it's us against the books instead of each other, because again, especially on Twitter, there's just a lot of toxicness. I don't know if that's the proper term there, but I mean, you guys know what I mean there. All right, we'll be back next week for the Propcast, and I promise we will get into NBA next week for the Propcast. So it'll be busy times for the Propcast, so look out for us. Then it's just a great reminder to make sure you guys subscribe to the Propcast YouTube channel, but also make sure you guys follow my guy Chris over on the Twitter's machine at ChrisBeCappinn with 2 P's and 2 N's. You can follow me there as well at SportsNerd824. Till then, good luck with your bets this weekend. Let's break these books off, and always remember to let it ride.